Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my Week 11 running back rankings for the 2021 fantasy football season. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about a variety of topics, beginning with waiver wire. Again, I want to talk about a couple of the players on last night's Monday Night Football game and how we are going to potentially be approaching them and adding them to tonight's list in terms of waiver wire priority. After that, of course, we will transition to the running back conversation, of course, talking about matchups and talking about which defenses have been giving up the most points to opposing running backs thus far this season on average in a half PPR scoring format. Again, we do everything on a weekly basis via rankings in a half PPR scoring format, meeting everyone in the middle, whether you do play in a full PPR or a standard scoring format. Again, do not forget there are timestamps down in the description of the video for those of you who are looking for specific players, because after we talk about matchups, we'll be transitioning to our top 36 running back rankings, as I'll go ahead and share with you guys my perspective and opinion and the statistics that justify my reasoning as to why I am ranking it as such and why I believe the running back position will stack up as such when all is said and done by the end of week 11. Before we begin today's video, of course, I want to remind you guys, rankings are subject to change. As the week progresses, there are a variety of injuries that are obviously going to impact our rosters. So, of course, if in fact you're watching this on a later date, perhaps the rankings have adjusted. If you show up on Sunday mornings from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, Kickoff with Kirchhoff will have updated rankings there to help you set your lineups and get ready for then. Outside of that, if you guys haven't checked out Underdog Fantasy, it's another way to play fantasy football. Last night, I had the aspirations for proving my fantasy dominance over the entire landscape. I went ahead and at a certain point last night, I was in second place in that contest because I had Kittle and Higbee, but unfortunately, Deebo Samuel came on strong and I wasn't doing so well. But either way, if you guys are trying to have fun, play in multiple contests throughout the week, whether it is Monday, Sunday, the Thursday night game that is coming up, of course, between the New England Patriots and the Atlanta Falcons, you can draft a team, compete against thousands of others, and win some money. If you want to sign up today, use promo code Andrew in the link down in the description. Underdog Fantasy is willing to match up to $100 of your first deposit. Again, that is an extremely generous offer for those of you getting started and ready to play the Underdog way. Thank you very much. All right. Again, if you guys have not subscribed already, we're making fantasy football content for the entirety of the season. Please do me a favor, subscribe to the channel. We are on our way very closely to surpassing 57,000 subscribers. I cannot thank you guys enough for helping us get there this season. Thank you. All right, let's talk about the multitude of topics that we have to, of course, transition into, beginning with last night's Monday Night Football game. The first topic, and the reason why I wanted to mention it, is because the information that we've been given this morning is that Elijah Mitchell, starting running back of the San Francisco 49ers, has broken his finger and is going to require surgery. That may be a situation that may hold him out for a singular week, and if that's going to be the case, well then Jeff Wilson Jr. has himself a lot of opportunity this upcoming week playing against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Again, Elijah Mitchell had 27 total touches last night on the ground alone, which is going to obviously be pretty beneficial for any other running back that will step up in his stead, which of course is going to be Jeff Wilson. So Jeff Wilson, in my opinion, if you need a 1 week start and someone that is going to obviously play as a handcuff, he is an ad for this upcoming night's waiver wire pickup. Outside of that, not really interested in anything else. I think that pretty much covers it in that regard. For those of you who are wondering, Andrew, what about your Rams? Listen, guys, all of last week's, I anticipated the Rams to lose. I said it multiple times throughout the week, and you can go back and watch. The 49ers have the Rams number. They just purely do. They have beaten us 5 consecutive times in a row, which includes last night's performance. And of course, Matthew Stafford didn't make it easy on us, but neither did our defense. Either way, that is the fact. Those are the scenarios that we are dealing with, and we persist and we continue to go forward. Now that we've covered that topic, let's go ahead and let's begin with matchups at the running back position for week 11. We're going to be talking about how many points defenses are giving up to opposing running backs thus far this season on average in a half PPR scoring format. As you can see to the very left of our screen, it is titled 2021 Running Back Fantasy Points Allowed. As you can see, of course, the New York Jets are giving up the most points to opposing running backs this season. I mean, just this last week, there were 3 different running backs that scored a touchdown on the ground against the New York Jets. They've given up, I think, what's the statistic? 18, almost 19 performances from opposing running backs this season already that have all surpassed 10 or more points in a half PPR. It is just, record-breaking numbers in terms of points given up to opposing teams. I think they've allowed 17 rushing touchdowns this year. Just insanity. Outside of them, of course, Los Angeles Chargers, Detroit Lions, Atlanta Falcons, Seattle Seahawks. These are the teams that are also heavily struggling, and typically we want to play our running backs against them. So now that we've kind of given you some perspective, you can check out the bottom of our overall rankings here. The Buffalo Bills, Indianapolis Colts, Saints. These are teams that aren't typically giving up many points, whether it is via rushing yards, receiving yards, or predominantly touchdowns. That's the biggest difference maker. An extra 6-point influx of points obviously is the biggest difference maker when we look at the top teams like the Jets, Chargers, Lions, who have given up already double-digit touchdowns just on the ground to opposing running backs this season, while teams like the Pittsburgh Steelers, though they're on the bottom here, they've only given up, like 4 touchdowns this season to all running backs. So bend but don't break. A lot of these defenses on the bottom are typically ones that you want to avoid, but when you got a stud running back, you're firing them out anyway. Now, the other stat that I wanted to mention before we go to the next page is the 2021 running back rushing stats allowed. How many points opposing defenses are allowing to running backs from rushing stats alone, so rushing yardage and rushing touchdowns. It's a very similar list, but just wanted to go ahead and compound it in this direction because for those of you who are interested and have a running back that perhaps isn't going to get much PPR work, you'll have it kind of a baseline or an idea as to what they could potentially put up based on the averages this season. Now, many of you this week did mention in the comment section and had reached out to me asking, Andrew, our trade deadline is coming up this upcoming weekend. I want to know what the rest of season strength of schedule bodes for us besides the video that you posted last Friday. And I'm going to put it up here for those of you who want extra thoughts on the matter. But I went ahead and I took all the numbers from week 10, put it into my overall spreadsheet, and found what the rest of season strength of schedule looks like for the running back position rest of season from weeks 11 through 17. And of course, for the fantasy football playoffs, weeks 15 through 17. So as you can see on the very left, we have weeks 11 through 17 strength of schedule, as the Denver Broncos have the highest expectation of fantasy points scored for their respected running backs. They have the easiest strength of schedule, while on the very bottom of this list, with 18.69 fantasy points per game expected for the New England Patriots, Damien Harris, Rhamondre Stevenson, Brandon Bolden, they will have the most difficult running back schedule going forward for the rest of the season. Of course, wanted to throw this on screen for you guys to get a little bit of an idea as to what you can expect, perhaps which players to go after. If you want more details, again, the video that I mentioned prior that I posted last week will give you those thoughts. Outside of that, of course, we have the fantasy football playoffs between weeks 15 through 17. Again, you don't want to play in week 18, and you want to make sure that your commissioner potentially changes this now before it's too late, because in week 18, a lot of the teams in the NFL who have already secured a playoff position are not going to be starting their respective best players. You're often going to see whoever is secured the number 1 overall seed, whether it be the Cardinals, Tampa Bay, on the NFC side, they're not going to play their starters if, in fact, the win or loss is not going to change the standings for their playoff run. Either way, just wanted to throw that out there. The Jacksonville Jaguars and James Robinson has the easiest matchup going into the fantasy football playoffs. While on the other end of the spectrum, we have Christian McCaffrey with the toughest schedule, but I'm not worried about Christian McCaffrey. He's a stud, and we'll talk about that in just a little bit. Okay, just wanted to throw these out there. Let's go ahead and let's transition to our top 36 running back rankings on the week. Again, do not forget rankings are subject to change. If you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe. Let's get into this, shall we? Quick and easy. The running back position for week 11 begins with our number 1, and yes, he's back, and I'm not talking about Cam Newton. I'm talking about Christian McCaffrey finally being healthy and once again showing everyone that he is one of the best fantasy running backs in the National Football League. Not only did he have 21.1 fantasy points with no touchdown scored, this is another incredible performance. 10 targets, 10 receptions, 66 receiving yards, while he had 13 carries for 95 yards. Let's not forget, the entire Carolina Panthers offense, respectively their running backs, ran the ball 31 total times. And only 13 of those attempts went to Christian McCaffrey because this was a blowout. This was a one-sided affair where the Arizona Cardinals could not keep up. Colt McCoy went out, and it was just all shambles for that entire team. The only thing that we have to worry about with Christian McCaffrey, it's definitely not going to be receptions because Cam Newton is certainly going to get the ball in his direction. It's not going to be opportunity on the ground. It's more or less going to be opportunity on the goal line. And yes, this last weekend, we did see Cam Newton have a rushing attempt, scored a touchdown. We saw, of course, Chuba Hubbard score a rushing touchdown as well. And we also saw some goal line rushing attempts or down in the 5-yard line and in for Amir Abdullah. A lot of those were garbage time, and a lot of those are not going to stay consistent as the weeks progress. Christian McCaffrey is slowly but surely getting into a fantastic position. Again, he's coming off of 2 weeks in which he had 18 touches and 23 touches. It's only going to grow and become that much easier for him to score fantasy points. Moving on to number 2, Dalvin Cook. Dalvin Cook is an incredible running back, and finally he scored a touchdown and accompanied his fantasy performance with a great overall play, 19.3 half PPR fantasy points. When he's getting himself the opportunity that he is, because, by all means, this is elite opportunity. 24 total rushing attempts, 3 catches on 5 targets. When you're touching the ball 27 times per game, you are going to score touchdowns. Now, unfortunately, the entire factor of whether or not he scored more than 1 touchdown was certainly on the table. And unfortunately, when he got down to the goal line, he had a handful of touches in which he was stuffed consistently. The offensive line wasn't helping him out. And truly, the play calls just weren't great for him. And on 2 of the drives in which they got down to the 3-yard line, unfortunately, Dalvin Cook was stuffed. And then the following play, we have a play action boot. Tyler Conklin scores touchdowns. And of course, we all know Tyler Conklin scored 2 touchdowns this last week. Certainly could have helped Dalvin Cook's entire performance. Could have had himself a 30-point game, but either way, he's a fantastic running back. The last 3 games that he's played against the Green Bay Packers, a division rival, he has scored 21.3, 26.6, and 47.6 fantasy points. Those are the last 3 performances. I mean, unbelievable player, and is going to be great this week. Moving on to Najee Harris, our number 3. The Pittsburgh Steelers running back is coming off of a week in which he had 105 rushing yards, 4 catches for 28 yards, and unfortunately, they ended with a tie. But Najee Harris had some other unfortunate realities with him. And for us in fantasy, it was tough to see that he had a rushing touchdown called back. And in my opinion, when I go back and I even watched that play, I think, okay, yes, it's holding. But man, if that offensive lineman just let him go, Najee Harris is going to beat him to the edge and he's going to score regardless. But either way, that's a 6-point swing that could have definitely been in our direction. Nonetheless, they take on the second easiest matchup at the running back position, playing against the Los Angeles Chargers. The Chargers have given up 1,069 rushing yards this season. They have also given up 14 rushing touchdowns this season to opposing running backs and are giving up 26.8 fantasy points per game and a half PPR. It's the easiest matchup that you could possibly ask for from an elite level running back as this outside of the Jets. We're good to go with Najee Harris. Number 4 is Jonathan Taylor, the thumbnail for today's video. You may be wondering, Andrew, it's a difficult matchup. Are we really firing up Jonathan Taylor? I don't know if anybody's really asking that, but if in case you are, this just serves as a reminder that yes, we are firing him up because I don't care what matchup he plays against. Jonathan Taylor is the Derrick Henry right now in the National Football League. He's the guy that is cleaning it up on the ground, and we're starting every single week regardless of matchup. And on top of the fact that he had 116 rushing yards last week, 6 catches, 21.6 fantasy points. He also had a 30-yard run called back on maybe, in my opinion, the worst holding call that I have seen throughout this entire season while I've watched film of these games. Just it doesn't make sense, some of the calls that are made. But either way, since week 5, Jonathan Taylor has been averaging 25 fantasy points per game, or nearly 25 fantasy points per game in a half PPR. The last time we saw the Buffalo Bills defense play against a stud running back, it was Derrick Henry. What did he do? 143 yards, 3 rushing touchdowns against this defense in week 6. Why not Jonathan Taylor? That's my thought process, and that's why I'm firing him up. We have Nick Chubb as our number 5. Hopefully, he's going to come off the injured reserve this week and be healthy to go. I'm expecting that to be the case, especially considering the fact that they play against the Detroit Lions, giving up the 3rd most points to opposing running backs. It's 26.54 per week to opposing running backs on average. Also, the Detroit Lions defense, we all know they can give up yards on the ground. Through the air, they've also given up a bunch of points, 6 receiving touchdowns to opposing running backs. Obviously, if Kareem Hunt is not going to be active, that is something that Nick Chubb could potentially, tap into this upcoming week. Besides the fact that it's an incredible matchup, Detroit Lions have also given up 4 100-yard rushers already this season. And the last time we saw Nick Chubb, he had himself 137 rushing yards on only 14 carries and 2 rushing touchdowns against the Cincinnati Bengals in week 9. By all means, this is just a one-sided affair in my opinion. They're going to be running the ball down Detroit's throat. The last time we saw another team like the Eagles play against the Detroit Lions, the Eagles had themselves 2 running backs that each had 2 rushing touchdowns. Should be a one-sided rushing affair for one of the best running teams in the National Football League like Cleveland. Moving on, we have Joe Mixon as our number 6. Now, in terms of consistency of play at the running back position, Joe Mixon has been absolutely incredible as of late. In 3 out of his last 4 performances, he has had over 23 fantasy points. That just alone is mind-boggling because when you think of Joe Mixon, you think to yourself, all right, a guy that is obviously going to get a lot of touches. Maybe he doesn't score touchdowns, but my goodness, has he been scoring touchdowns? And not only that, he's been getting a lot of work in the receiving game. In 3 out of the last 4 games, he has had himself at least 4 catches in every single game. Out of 3 out of those 4, he has had a minimum of 40 receiving yards and has had a total of 2 receiving touchdowns. The work that he can get on the ground is obviously going to stay stable. But the fact that he's getting work in the PPR game, getting himself 5 to 6 targets per game, my goodness, that is just going to continue to increase his overall floor of production, making him that much better of a play. Currently, he's the number 5 overall running back in fantasy and has himself, in my opinion, a very good matchup against the Las Vegas Raiders. Should be a great play this upcoming week. That's Joe Mixon. Moving on to Ezekiel Elliott, our running back for the Dallas Cowboys. So here's the deal. Ezekiel Elliott, wasn't the most efficient running back last week, but he did play against the Atlanta Falcons. They are one of the better, run-stopping defenses as a whole. But either way, Ezekiel Elliott, 2 rushing touchdowns saved this week, had himself 19 plus fantasy points. We love to see that. On top of it, could have had himself a 3rd rushing touchdown, but unfortunately was in a scenario in which, of course, he got stuffed early, and then we had boot play action, and Dak Prescott running in for a touchdown. So even though that is unfortunate, it is going to happen. They play against the Kansas City Chiefs this week. I think this is going to be a very high-scoring game. Now that Patrick Mahomes is finally back, this Dallas Cowboys offense is firing on all cylinders. This is going to be a very interesting game and an exciting one to say the very least. Of course, when Dak Prescott's in the lineup and Ezekiel Elliott's ready to go, hopefully Tyron Smith comes back. He is 18 plus points per game on average since 2020, and those kind of stats just keep him in line for being in our lineup. We have Austin Ekeler as our next running back here, our number 8. Though it is the Pittsburgh Steelers matchup, I do think that the Pittsburgh Steelers have themselves some holes that they have to fix. They are a bend but don't break kind of defense. They have definitely been a team throughout the year that has given up a bunch of yards on the ground. In fact, they've given up 4.75 yards per carry. I mean, that is unbelievable. And on top of it, outside of that, they've only given up 4 touchdowns. Now, that is the reality, and that is the unfortunate thing. So when we think about, of course, what Austin Ekeler is capable of doing this upcoming week, he's certainly going to need himself opportunity. Because if he's going to touch the ball only 10 times on the ground, sure, he can get himself 50, maybe 60 rushing yards, but the PPR work is what defines Austin Ekeler and separates him from the pack. Only having 3 receptions for 15 yards, sure, had himself a receiving touchdown last week is great, but he needs to get a little bit more, especially against the defense like Pittsburgh. It's going to be a competitive matchup there. Moving on to A.J. Dillon on number 9. Again, like I mentioned yesterday in the waiver wire episode, if in fact A.J. Dillon is somehow, some way available in your league, he needs to be picked up. I don't know why he would be available, but either way, he plays against Minnesota, giving up the 13th most points to running backs this season. The last time we saw Aaron Jones play against the Minnesota Vikings, especially the last 4 contests, here are his fantasy point contributions. 15.6, 16.8, 27, and 23. Every single one of those contests, Aaron Jones had a minimum of 1 rushing touchdown. When we have A.J. Dillon going into this upcoming weekend's contest, coming off of a game in which he had 21 carries for 66 yards, 2 rushing touchdowns, 2 catches for 62 yards, and 25.8 fantasy points. Ooh, I mean, A.J. Dillon, the sky's the limit for you, my guy, and I think he's going to be a fantastic play, and that is why he sits as our number 9 in a fantastic matchup against Minnesota. Moving on to our number 10, we have DeAndre Swift. Now, when I was looking at the Sunday afternoon, kind of game logs and seeing who had however many fantasy points and touches and, receptions and all this kind of stuff, the typical thing that I do while I'm on the couch prior to the Sunday night game, I ended up seeing somebody had 33 carries. And I was like, wait, when did Derrick Henry start playing again? Did he get healthy all of a sudden and I missed it? And then all of a sudden I realized, wow, DeAndre Swift had 33 carries for 130 rushing yards against the Pittsburgh Steelers. And yes, he was able to do that mainly because the game was so close and the Pittsburgh Steelers were not able to pull away and score enough points to where, of course, it would force the Lions to have to throw the ball. But they continued to run the ball, and DeAndre Swift certainly delivered and had himself, in my opinion, a pretty good game overall. When I look at the stat lines and I see, okay, he's going to get himself 36 total touches in a given week, well, of course he's going to find success. And though he wasn't able to score a touchdown, though he was given opportunities down on the 5-yard line and in, bend but don't break, that is, what the Pittsburgh Steelers do the best. I look at this and I think to myself, well, DeAndre Swift, he's a fantastic running back. 2 of the other running backs on that team had themselves rushing touchdowns. If that had gone his way, which it will in the future, of course, he would have been an even better play. But either way, a fantastic overall running back and our number 10 on the week. We have James Conner as our number 11. Again, when I think about the Cardinals' backfield, it is mainly going to be determined or dictated by whether or not Kyler Murray is healthy and whether or not DeAndre Hopkins is there. If we have a full, fledged entire Cardinals offense, then James Conner is an even better play. But even without those potential things being there for them, I still think James Conner is an incredible play because they play against Seattle. They've given up the 5th most points to running backs. Just recently, of course, we saw A.J. Dillon go for 25.8 fantasy points, 2 total touchdowns, 62 receiving yards, 66 rushing yards. We saw the LA Rams duo of Sony Michel and Henderson go for 119 on the ground for 2 rushing touchdowns. Najee Harris, 81 on the ground, 6 catches, 46 yards and a touchdown. Alvin Kamara, 50 on the ground, had himself 10 catches, 128 and a touchdown. The Seattle Seahawks cannot stop running backs. They just purely can't. And their defense, they looked decent this last week against the Green Bay Packers, but certainly could not stop A.J. Dillon at the end of the night. When I look at James Conner, and I say, of course, he's scoring touchdowns, he's getting full, fledged opportunity, and of course, this game script wasn't in his favor to get him more touches. I think, of course, this is going to be an easier one for them. The Cardinals will be in this contest and competing. Last week, didn't have a single carry inside the 10-yard line, which is typically his bread and butter. And the fact that he was still able to score, it's very exciting for his potential future. Moving on to Alvin Kamara at number 12. If Alvin Kamara is healthy and playing, he is in the top 12 category, but I have no specific information regarding whether or not he is going to play. Because again, Wednesday is typically the first practice of the week, unless you have a Thursday game. So as the week progresses, we're going to kind of keep our eye out for Alvin Kamara, see exactly what he is going to do, if he's practicing, if he's being held out of practice, if he's limited, and that will dictate where he goes. If he's playing, he's a top 12 play every single time, especially considering they play against Philadelphia this week. I think, of course, we may see some limited nature of him if he does play, and Mark Ingram will be more prevalent. But either way, he is still such an efficient running back, and of course, their goal line go-to back all season long. All right, let's move on to the RB2 category, beginning with James Robinson. James Robinson had himself another great game. In fact, in the last 5 games that James Robinson has played and has been fully healthy, he has surpassed 16 fantasy points in every single contest. 16.4, 17.6, 21.2, 20.1, and 22.4. In all 5 of those contests, he also has scored a rushing touchdown. And as long as he is going to be the main focal point of this entire offense, then by all means, of course, James Robinson is going to be in this top 13 category and be right here at number 13, taking on the San Francisco 49ers defense that have given up the 10th most points to opposing running backs. And that also takes into account last night's performance where the running back position for the Rams completely vanished. So that just kind of gives you some idea as to how many points the 49ers have given up and how easy it is at times to run the ball against them when you're not making dumb mistakes and putting yourself in a bad position in the second half. Either way, James Robinson, a fantastic play, has been hyper efficient and is a must start. Moving on to Leonard Fournette, our number 14. I think Leonard Fournette is another one of these fantastic plays. Since week 4, Leonard Fournette has been the number 10 overall running back in terms of total fantasy points at the running back position and number 10 in terms of fantasy points per game. He's been extremely efficient. Ronald Jones is a no-show, especially this last week. Didn't touch the ball at all. We saw Giovanni Bernard have a couple opportunities to score late, but that was mainly because the matchup was out of hand. But the reason that Leonard Fournette is because he had 9 targets, 8 receptions, 45 yards. When you play in a full PPR scoring format, regardless of what this guy is doing in the end zone, down on the goal line, doesn't matter. 8 catches, anything above those 4 catches he pretty much averages per game is just gravy. And that is why we love Leonard Fournette in the position he currently sits in. They take on the New York Giants, giving up 23.7 fantasy points per game. That's the 7th most amongst all teams in the National Football League. This is a very advantageous matchup, and one, hopefully, they'll be getting back to running the ball, establishing that, and, of course, making less mistakes with Brady throwing the ball in the opposite team's direction. Moving on to Saquon Barkley, our number 15. The other side of this matchup, the New York Giants, they take on, of course, Leonard Fournette's Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And the reason why I have Saquon Barkley here at number 15 is because I'm confident that he's going to play. And if he's going to play, then by all means, he's going to be in the starting position. I've talked about this week over week ad nauseum. The fact that we have seen Devontae Booker be one of the best running backs in the National Football League in terms of fantasy football since the absence of Saquon Barkley in terms of total fantasy points scored per game is insane to me. I mean, the fact that Devontae Booker is still a relevant running back, regardless of how terrible everyone says this, Giants offensive line is, and how many times they're in bad, overall game scripts in the scenarios that they're in, they're not able to run the ball as much, doesn't matter. The Giants feed their running backs the ball, and if Saquon is healthy, I don't care that he plays against Tampa Bay, because the last time we saw Saquon Barkley play against a tough run-stop defense, in fact, it was against the best, in my opinion, the New Orleans Saints. And what did he do? He scored 27.9 half PPR fantasy points against them. I mean, just this last week, we saw, the man, the myth, the legend, the return of Antonio Gibson as he dropped 20-plus points against Tampa Bay. 2 rushing touchdowns certainly helped him, but nonetheless, opportunity is opportunity. I think Saquon will get that, and he'll definitely be able to score some fantasy points for us this week. Jeff Wilson Jr. is our number 16. Like I mentioned in the beginning of the video, Elijah Mitchell is going to have surgery on his finger. The team is optimistic that he's going to potentially play this week, but they'd be safe to keep him out. And I think that's probably going to be the case. Again, Elijah Mitchell is coming off of a week in which he had 27 rushing attempts. Of course, if you're going to see those kind of opportunities for a running back like Jeff Wilson, I mean, the last time we saw Jeff Wilson as a starting running back of the 49ers, 2020, the last 2 weeks of the season, weeks 16 and 17, Jeff Wilson had 20-plus fantasy points in both those contests and was dominating. And hopefully, we'll get back to that this upcoming week, playing against the Jacksonville Jaguars, giving up the 12th most points to opposing running backs. I think that's going to be the case if Jeff Wilson's the lone back there, and there is no Elijah Mitchell. I don't expect JaMychal Hasty and or Trey Sermon impeding on his overall upside. Moving on to David Montgomery, our number 17. David Montgomery is coming off of the bye week, and he takes on the Baltimore Ravens defense. I mean, honestly, when we look at things, David Montgomery and think, okay, is it a tough matchup? I'm not really too concerned about the matchup. The last time I saw David Montgomery against a tough defense, it was prior to the bye week. 13 carries for 63 yards against the Pittsburgh Steelers defense. So, I mean, the Baltimore Ravens, who have given up the 14th most points to running backs, they're not too much of a concern in my opinion. It's a matter of whether or not the game script is going to allow David Montgomery to stay in the game. And though he has been a receiving back over the last couple of years, with, of course, the absence of Tariq Cohen, it is obviously something I want to keep an eye on because there's always a potential that he falls out of favor. That being said, I don't think that'll be the case. I think David Montgomery is going to come back to being his prestige level. And, of course, I mean, prior to him leaving and getting injured, he was the number 11 overall running back in half PPR. He's a stud back, and there's a reason why I have so much confidence in him going into this week's matchup. He's a number 17. Moving on to Michael Carter, our number 18 overall running back. Michael Carter has been insane. Since week 4, he has been the number 13 overall running back in fantasy football. I mean, we talked about it in the offseason. Michael Carter has a really great opportunity to take this backfield, and stranglehold it and pretty much just suck all of the life and fantasy points out of it. And that is exactly what he has done. I mean, my goodness, he's been fantastic. Coming off of another week in which he played against the Buffalo Bills, but still had 16.2 fantasy points. I don't care if it's garbage time. I don't care which quarterback is under center. It doesn't matter because even if Joe Flacco is going to begin starting this week, if Zach Wilson is once again out, that even is more beneficial for potentially Michael Carter, as Joe Flacco has shown in his past, specifically with the Baltimore Ravens, that he loves to target running backs. Whether it was Justin Forsett, Danny Woodhead, Kyle Juszczyk, these guys were making careers off of catching the ball out of the backfield on a consistent basis. Either way, this has been a consistent running back. He sits at number 18, but honestly, his ceiling is way higher than this. We'll see how it pans out against Miami this week. They're a pretty good defense, and they've kind of turned it around as of late, but I think Michael Carter could certainly find himself in the end zone once again this week. Antonio Gibson's our number 19. Though he's coming off of a game in which he had 20.8 fantasy points and 24 total rushing attempts. I mean, the last time we saw Antonio Gibson be given 20-plus rushing attempts this season, he also scored 20 fantasy points. It was just a couple weeks back. Opportunity leads to success in fantasy football. I preach it every single week. And as long as this kind of a running back is going to be given said opportunity, then by all means, he is going to be in a great position to succeed. But again, they were ahead of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers for the majority of that game. And the Tampa Bay Buccaneers were never able to get themselves back into it. So what did that do? That allowed the Washington football team to run the ball. And with their offensive guard, the all-pro Sheriff back, they continued to do that. And Antonio Gibson found the end zone twice. If you play against Carolina and you are down in points, and this may be a matchup in which, of course, J.D. McKissic may be used more, then, of course, Antonio Gibson will be faded out. But in my opinion, as long as the opportunity is going in his direction, he should be an automatic play. Damien Harris is our number 20. As of this morning, the information that has been given to us is that he did practice today, and he has been cleared from the concussion protocol. Again, a lot of the conversation has been around Rhamondre Stevenson, but I do want to go ahead and once again mention that from weeks 5 through 9, Damien Harris was the number 8 overall running back in fantasy. He had 5 consecutive games there of scoring a rushing touchdown minimum. Just one minimum. I mean, he had a couple that he scored 2. The likelihood of Rhamondre Stevenson getting some touches is certainly going to be there. But if we see a scenario in which Damien Harris comes back and is the full workhorse back, then by all means, he's a top 15 running back, and number 20 is disrespectful. But the fact of the matter is they do play against the Atlanta Falcons. They have only given up 3.83 yards per carry. This season, though, they have given up the 4th most points to opposing running backs. A lot of that has to do with the receiving work. In fact, this season alone, the Atlanta Falcons have given up 62 catches for 476 receiving yards. That is the biggest moneymaker for that team. And if Brandon Bolden's out, maybe Rhamondre gets the receiving work and slash some of the running back work, and then Damien Harris is the goal line back, touching the ball 10, 15 times and finding a lot of value this week on Thursday night. Myles Gaskin's our number 21. I think having Myles Gaskin at 21 is pretty safe. Again, it is the easiest matchup of the week. If Myles Gaskin finishes with 30 points, I won't be surprised. Honestly, I won't, because when I look at the Jets and the fact that they've given up 1,061 rushing yards, 17 rushing touchdowns, and are giving up 34.91 total fantasy points per game on average this season is unbelievable. On top of that, Myles Gaskin has touched the ball 41 times in the last 2 games. If he is going to continue to get these, clutch touches, then of course he's going to find value. On top of the fact that, last Thursday night, Tua stole a touchdown. He had a rush inside the 1-yard line. Obviously wasn't able to get in there. Tua stole it the following play after. He also had another carry inside the 3-yard line, and that drive obviously kind of fell apart. The offensive line let the Calais Campbell-led defense break into the backfield, stop them, and that drive led to a field goal. But Myles Gaskin had multiple opportunities to score. Unfortunately, wasn't able to do so, but I still think against the Jets, who have given up, 18 performances of 10-plus fantasy points to different running backs this season already, Gaskin is in a fantastic position to succeed and maybe even be significantly better than 21 overall. We have Josh Jacobs at number 22. I don't know what to do with Josh Jacobs. They do play against Cincinnati, the 6th easiest matchup of the running back position. Recently, Nick Chubb, 137 and 2 touchdowns. Carter, 77 and 1, while also getting 9 catches and 95 through the air. Aaron Jones, 103 rushing yards on the ground. We've seen Cincinnati struggle, tremendously against the running back position. But Josh Jacobs only had 7 carries for 16 yards, 5 catches for 20 yards, 6.1 fantasy points. And sure, he had the opportunity to score a touchdown. Unfortunately, tried to bounce it to the outside because it got stuffed up in the middle. The following play after that, Hunter Renfrow scored a touchdown down on the goal line. We get it. But the opportunity is there at times, and that is worrisome because Kenyon Drake sometimes comes in, takes some work. Josh Jacobs isn't guaranteed the full workload of getting himself 15-plus touches per game, and that is something that worries me. So either way, I do think it's a great matchup, and I do think I'm going to be playing him wherever I have him because I probably don't have many of these other guys above him on roster as well. So he starts because he's a starting running back of his respective team. Will have goal line opportunities, but he's not the most, lavish play, to say the very least. Moving on to number 23, we have Darrel Williams. I do expect Clyde Edwards-Helaire to return, but I do expect him to return to a running back by committee situation because, we saw Darrel Williams have himself 11 carries for 43 yards, but 9 targets, 9 receptions, 101 receiving yards, a receiving touchdown, and a huge receiving touchdown play, which went over the top of a defender and just dominated him. 24.9 fantasy points, a great overall performance. And in fact, since week 6 of the 2021 fantasy football season, Darrel Williams has been the number 4 overall running back in terms of total fantasy points. Can we ask for anything more? Probably not. He's been absolutely incredible. And when we look at the weeks ahead with Clyde Edwards potentially coming back, I think to myself, did Clyde Edwards ever get himself 9 targets in a game? Did he ever have himself 9 catches? They want to keep Darrel Williams rotating in there, and that's what I expect to see as they'll ease CEH back in. But this is going to be a Darrel Williams backfield going forward. Again, he also had a 4th and inches rushing attempt, which he was able to get it on the 2-yard line, going to the 1-yard line. The following play action pass, Tyreek Hill. Could have had another touchdown for his Sunday night performance. Either way, Darrel Williams, a great overall play at 23. Devonta Freeman, with Le'Veon Bell getting cut this morning, I do think that maybe that does mean that Latavius Murray is going to return. We'll keep an eye on that as the week progresses, but it also means that this backfield is wide open for Devonta Freeman to keep the job and dominate. I know he's coming off of a terrible performance of 7.3 fantasy points, but he plays against Chicago. This is a run-first offense. Prior to this bad performance, the guy had scored a touchdown for 3 consecutive games for the Baltimore Ravens. I think he's a fantastic overall option and someone that I'm keeping in my lineup because of the offense that he's associated with. Moving on to the RB3 conversation, we're going to have a lot of backups here, and that's exactly the entire purpose of this. We talk about Mark Ingram because, again, if in fact we have Alvin Kamara missing this week, Mark Ingram probably goes into that top 15 conversation. We'll move everybody else down. As for what he could potentially do, even if Alvin Kamara is active, well, Mark Ingram is a flex play. Because, again, he's going to get himself work in the receiving game, as we have seen in weeks past. He's going to have himself opportunity on the ground. He's going to get himself probably 13 to 15 touches per game rest of season, especially if, in fact, this is a nagging knee injury for Alvin Kamara. If that's going to be the case, there's always going to be opportunity for touchdown. They play against the Eagles, giving up the 8th most points to running backs. And I think, Mark Ingram's already looked like a, regenerated running back. Late in 2020 for the Ravens, didn't look great. This season, had himself a couple good games, but didn't look great. But now that he's back in New Orleans, it's back to the old days. Mark Ingram looks fantastic. Rhamondre Stevenson's our number 26. Again, when I'm talking about running backs that are backups, that are still going to have a lot of opportunities, let's talk about Rhamondre Stevenson and what he saw. 20 carries for over 100 yards, 2 rushing touchdowns. On top of that, he had 3 carries from inside the 3-yard line on Sunday. 2 of those drives led to Hunter Henry receiving touchdowns. So though he was given opportunities and failed, Hunter Henry turned around and made the most of it. Rhamondre Stevenson could have had himself 4 rushing touchdowns. I'm not even kidding, he could have. And that is what makes me think, well, he has value, especially considering he had himself 5 targets, 4 catches. If he's going to be an active part of the receiving game, I talked about it earlier in regards to Damien Harris. The Atlanta Falcons are only giving up about 3.8 yards per carry this season, but they've given up 62 catches and over 430 receiving yards. If Rhamondre Stevenson is going to be used in that aspect, I think he's a great overall play as a flex option going into this Thursday night game, which is typically all about the running back position. Moving on to Clyde Edwards-Helaire, the longest name that you could possibly come up with. Here it is, number 27. I do expect him to get reestablished in this offense and get himself more and more touches, but he is, again, still coming off an injury. He did practice last week, and hopefully that will mean a clean transition in. I don't expect him to be the 100% lead back. If he's going to be, then by all means he is. But I really do think that Darrel Williams has done enough in the last 4 or 5 weeks to establish himself a running back by committee situation. If that's going to be the case, I think they even prefer Darrel Williams down on the goal line like we've seen prior to Clyde Edwards' injury. Multiple games in which Darrel Williams stealing touchdowns. They could be considered vultures, but now going forward will be the norm. We'll move on to number 28, Devonta Foreman, one of these waiver wire pickup potential options. Devonta Foreman has the 11th easiest matchup against Houston coming off of the bye week. I think Devonta Foreman, he had himself a rushing attempt for a touchdown, wasn't able to secure that. So did Adrian Peterson. The whole question is whether or not we are going to see one or the other score. I think the fact that Devonta Foreman played more snaps, had more total touches, that leads me to obviously trusting him more, and that is going to be, the current case for this week. But until we see some more time with this, specific offense and the rotation that they have, we're going to have to kind of wait and see how they exactly want to approach it on a weekly basis. Moving on to number 29, we have Wayne Gallman. Wayne Gallman takes on the New England Patriots. And the reason why I wanted to mention Gallman over Mike Davis is mainly because, again, Gallman actually looked good. He had himself a couple runs in which, yes, they were significantly negative yards. But again, the offensive line wasn't really helping him, and the entire matchup wasn't great. But now that you take on the New England Patriots, in my opinion, it's an easier matchup than Dallas. And the New England Patriots this season have given up an unbelievable amount of statistics through the air. In fact, they have given up 68 catches to opposing running backs for 651 receiving yards. If Wayne Gallman is going to be a receiving back, if in fact, because of what we've heard this week already, at this current moment in time while recording, the chances are Cordero Patterson doesn't play with the ankle injury. If that changes as the week progresses, so be it. But for right now, if Wayne Gallman's going to be the starting back, he will catch the ball a bunch and will have opportunities on the goal line. Could be great for him this upcoming week. Jordan Howard's our number 30. Jordan Howard really has benefited from the fact that the Eagles have kind of transitioned their offense from being, garbage time to running the ball nearly 60% of the time per game in the last 3 weeks here. He takes on the New Orleans Saints, giving up a putrid 2.78 yards per carry. For any, opposing running back, that is the worst thing that you want to see, is New Orleans on the docket in terms of your schedule. And going into this upcoming weekend's matchup, I am worried about Jordan Howard, but if he falls into the end zone, so be it. He could be lucky. Last season when these two teams played, Jalen Hurts dominated against this defense. Maybe Miles Sanders comes back. If he does, Jordan Howard will be adjusted. Either way, for right now, in my opinion, he's the lead back and the goal line touch guy. Moving on to D'Ernest Johnson at number 31. Garbage time, like I talked about it. It's the third easiest matchup at the position. We're talking about backup running backs if Kareem Hunt is not playing this week. We're talking about D'Ernest Johnson coming off of a performance in which he had 99 rushing yards, 8 targets, 7 catches, 58 yards. Like I talked about during the Hidden Gems video, of course, the New England Patriots give up a bunch of receptions to running backs. They just give it up for free. On top of it, the Detroit Lions, they've given up, besides the third most points to running backs, 4 100-yard rushers, 4 touchdowns to the Eagles 2 weeks ago. Obviously, Najee Harris had a touchdown called back, but potentially should have had that and had himself over 20 fantasy points. D'Ernest Johnson, not a bad option if he and Nick Chubb are splitting his backfield touches. Moving on to Alex Collins. If Chris Carson doesn't play, Alex Collins is here. Am I confident about Alex Collins at number 32? No, and that is why I have him at number 32. Playing against Arizona, not a fun matchup. Again, Alex Collins has been questionable for the last 4 weeks in a row. Pete Carroll comes out, says he wants to reestablish the run. If that's going to be the case, then Alex Collins will certainly be a part of that. But it's a matter of whether or not Russell Wilson can get back on the right track and lead this team down to the goal line. Because if the Seattle Seahawks aren't running the ball inside the 10, then of course Alex Collins is not going to find much success similar to last week. Moving on to Zack Moss at number 33 and Devin Singletary at number 34. I don't trust this backfield. So why do I mention them at the same time? Because it is up to you to Russian roulette and play these two accordingly. Because really they are both extremely risky options, but certainly they could both score on any given week. And one of them could have 4 receptions, the other could have 7 receptions in a given week. You never know. And that is the issue with the Bills backfield, and that's why I want to stay as far away as I possibly can with them. That's why I put them at number 33 and number 34, because truly, it's a difficult matchup against Indianapolis, and to be honest, I don't know which one of these two are going to be scoring a lot this week. Moving on to Tony Pollard, number 35. He did benefit from the fact that there was a lot of garbage time in that game against Atlanta. Had himself 12.8 fantasy points because of it. Had himself a 25-yard called back. Also could have had a rushing touchdown, but it was called back because of a holding. Either way, he plays against Tennessee. If he's going to get himself 7 targets, 6 receptions, 56 yards, maybe on a more consistent basis, even if it's kind of transitioned down to 4 targets, 4 receptions, 40 yards, he'll get himself an 8 value there. And that's all you need. He's not scoring rushing touchdowns. He's purely based on receptions and yards, and that is what's going to have to save him in this given week. Moving on to J.D. McKissic, our final option at the running back position. We talk about J.D. McKissic mainly because if the Carolina Panthers matchup does get into a scenario in which Cam Newton is just pouring points with Christian McCaffrey and DJ Moore, then by all means, Taylor Heineke's going to have to throw the ball. And where does he like to throw the ball outside of perhaps DeAndre Carter? Maybe if in fact Logan Thomas returns, Terry McLaurin. J.D. McKissic is a safety blanket and a check down that finds a lot of value, and that is why he sits at number 36. These are my Week 11 running back rankings for the 2021 fantasy football season. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Tomorrow, we'll talk about the wide receiver position. If you have not yet already, subscribe to the channel. Also, check out Underdog Fantasy. Use promo code Andrew if you sign up today. Underdog Fantasy is willing to match up to $100 of your first deposit. I can't thank you guys enough for continuing to allow me inside of your homes, inside of your cars, throughout your commutes, to, of course, talk fantasy and share the commonality of loving the National Football League. Either way, thank you, everybody, for watching. And until tomorrow, I'll see you guys. Peace.